Welcome to the Workgrid, the podcast where we explore the evolving landscape of the digital workplace and uncover the latest trends, technologies, and insights from the very leaders shaping the future of work. I'm your host, Rob Ryan, and today we have a very special episode lined up for you. Joining us is Weston Morris, Senior Director and Global Strategy Lead at Unisys. Weston is a veteran in the field with over 40 years' experience in workplace technology and employee experience. His expertise spans AI, automation, and enhancing the collaboration, productivity, and experiences of today's digital workers. Notably, Weston has been recognized by HDI as one of the top 25 thought leaders in IT service and customer experience, and is the creative force behind the Digital Workplace Deep Dive podcast. In today's episode, we're going to delve into the fascinating world of AI in its current state as it lives in and around the digital workplace and experience management. We're going to discuss the introduction of AI, how to measure employee experience in relation to AI, and so much more. So without further ado, let's dive into the conversation with Weston Morris and explore how the digital workplace is evolving. Stay tuned. Weston, thanks for coming on to the show today. I'd love to hear a little bit about yourself and some of the work that you've been doing with Unisys, so our listeners can get a sense of your professional profile and really your experience over in employee experience.
So over the last probably 7, 8 years, I've been focusing on the digital workplace, and it's just been such an exciting area because that's where we all live, right? Everybody is interacting with the workplace, the tools you use, the devices, the apps. When things go wrong, which we saw the whole CrowdStrike thing just the other day, can be pretty unexpected and frequent, and can wreak havoc in a broad way. So my goal is to try to figure out how do I eliminate digital friction, and then when things do go wrong, can I proactively resolve problems? And if it has to be reactive, how do we do that as quickly as possible? So it's been a journey. I think the pandemic also provided a whole nother lens on the digital workplace. At the beginning of 2020, none of us were thinking how important remote work would be, working from home. We also didn't realize how important our frontline workers were that couldn't go home, and the fact that they still had to do their job, and in some cases, some very difficult circumstances. Think about the individuals in healthcare, the police, firefighters, in people at factory that could not go home. They had to physically go there. And I think that shone a light on the importance of these frontline workers, and how many there are, and what a large percentage of the workforce it is, and we better be taking care of them as well. So it's been an exciting few years for sure.
Absolutely. And I know certainly from a vendor perspective of keeping tabs on, who's doing what in the digital workplace, there has seemed to be a focus on allowing Frontline to have the necessary tools, resources available to them so that they do feel closer to the organization as a whole. Have you been seeing that as well as a part of your work?
Well, you're certainly seeing it from the vendor side. For example, Microsoft recently released their frontline worker license, their version licensing for M365, and it's with great intent. You realize that when we all went home, we're on camera now, right? If we look back at 2019, how often we've had our camera on,
Sure.
how often were we really worrying about great audio, the ability to collaborate, to have whiteboarding tools that we could all work on remotely. And in the past, it was the person in the conference room was the first class citizen, so to speak, and those that were joining remotely, we almost forgot about them. We end the meeting, and you go, oh yeah, Tony, I see you and Sally are on the meeting too. Do you have anything to add? And that flipped around when everybody was remote, right? But for the frontline workers, as we all move forward with ability to communicate and collaborate and be more connected, even when we're physically not connected, the frontline workers, I think, even lost more ground. And so it's great that there's tools that are made available. I'm not seeing that being rolled out as frequently as I think it should be, where employees maybe on their mobile devices, frontline workers would have access to ability to see who their colleagues are, share ideas, get news, really feel part of the company. So that's one angle. The other is we'll talk, I think, more about AI a little bit in this. We can't have a podcast today but not talk about AI. But how can these generative AI, generative chatbots, executive assistants, whatever you want to call them, how can they help in very specific frontline worker activities? And that's really one of the things I love about Workgrid is you guys started in the financial space, solving a real world problem in the finance space with generative AI, and that should be done, I think, with every frontline worker scenario, whether it's factory, retail, healthcare, police, airlines. They all have unique needs. Let's provide them the tools they need as frontline workers. Let's give them a digital workplace that really matters and lets them be productive.
Absolutely. And those organizations, I think, that truly understand their employee journey across those personas, they're the ones who are willing to invest in the frontline worker, in that deskless worker, where sometimes you see more traditional, if you will, organizations, they might be a bit more reticent to spend to end up giving them the app, giving them the ability to connect to the organization on their phone. And I think it certainly comes down from the top in leadership. How do we think about the various pools and populations that we have working for us, as opposed to thinking them as just a cost center? Really, the opportunity that you have across strategic alignment, the ability to mitigate risk, the ability to create a better customer experience by and large, if they're tethered to the organization, regardless where they happen to work, whether they're installing cable out there to someone's home, or whether it's retail and they're trying to assist someone with a particular product or SKU. There's so much availability and opportunity to really fill that gap. I've seen a couple good intranet vendors help to solve for that, and some spot vendors do the same, but it still comes back to the customer set. Like, is their mind on creating that cohesive experience across their employee populations? I hope to think that COVID was a point to pause and think about where the benefits may be to bring them back into the organization as a whole. One of the things I'd love to get into with you is really what you're seeing and hearing from clients as it relates to employee experience, and particularly, of course, AI. It is the hot topic, and where it fits within the digital workplace as a whole. Unisys AI approach, how they view this emergent trend within organizations. Everyone seems to have an adoption curve or a maturity model at this point. What's some of your key perspectives, or what hits top of mind when you think about AI and employee experience in the digital workplace?
Well, I'm glad we're finally bringing these two together. If you look back at some of my podcasts on the digital workplace deep dive, the more than half have been related to employee experience. How do we measure it? What do we do with it? Is there an ROI, from a business lens? What's the connection to employee experience to both the the CHRO and the CIO? Can they come together? And then more recently, some of the episodes have really been focusing on AI. I'd love to bring them together. So Rob, thanks for inviting me here to even talk about that. So I've really been thinking about that question. What is the role of AI and employee experience? And two different areas come to mind. I'd love to get your thoughts on it too. So one area is probably the most obvious. As we measure employee experience, we're measuring it today about their devices that they use, the performance they have, the digital friction they're getting, the apps they're using. Can they get help and support when needed? Well, now we've just added another really important tool that's going to continue to grow in importance, and that is this virtual assistant, right? Whether it's Microsoft Copilot or whatever tool that you're using, that's just going to be there. It's everyday AI is what I saw Gartner calling it at a recent conference. It's just going to show up. It's just going to pop up in your tool sets, and it's just going to be there. Now, will you be productive with it? Does it make you afraid that somehow you're not going to know how to use it, and your peers will, and your value to the company will go down? Is it going to replace me? Is it somehow going to take over my job? There's all kinds of factors that I think are affecting employee experience. And so we could measure that, right? Just like we're measuring everything else with the digital workplace. Let's add this as another experience indicator, an XI, as we call it, that would feed into an XLA that is the overall experience that I am as an employee am having with IT, with what's being given to me to do my job. So that would be, I'd say, the most obvious.
Mm.
Another one, Rob, might be, well, let's now get a little bit more refined and create a specific XLA, an experience level agreement that is measuring a specific aspect of AI and how it's used. And just focus on that, on how that is impacting, my experience, as opposed to it being just one piece of the big picture. And it could even be tied to other factors. From a demographic point of view, my gender, my age, if you're allowed to collect those things, my role in the company, which part of the world I'm in, what language am I speaking? Because maybe the capabilities of the virtual agent, if I'm speaking to it or talking or chatting to it, maybe work great in English, but it maybe not so great in Hindi, as an example. So that is one area that I'm thinking. I'd love to get your reaction to that, Rob.
Yeah, I think it's emergent, of course. What we see is certainly patterns where they follow suit in terms of whoever's adoption model you want to look at, or AI maturity within the workplace, right? Where you have close to 20% of organizations who are just not having any part of it at right, because security, risk, concern, et cetera, it's keeping them out. And we see about 38 to 40% they're going through their pilot motions right now. So they're going to test out and trial perhaps a co-pilot, perhaps a handful of use cases, but they're pretty much siloed at that point. And in terms of having that oversight layer of really how this enhances the employee experience, that really is the leaders of digital workplace, those who most likely have done this before. Perhaps it was doing enterprise 2.0 early on, and they realized, hey, collaboration, social collaboration, sharing what you know, being pro-social is actually a benefit of the organization. But all those same fears that you brought up, hey, AI is introduced. What does this do for my job? What does it do to my expertise? What does it do for, potentially the way I work? I think back to those days, Enterprise 2.0, back in, what was that, 2007, 2008, emerging, and those same fears were there. Wait, you want me to share what I know to the organization? That's how I got here. That's how I got to this position. Um, and those walls had to come down, and leading organizations were able to introduce social technologies that were collaborative, that created communities of interest, communities of practice, et cetera. Now, to your point, now you're bringing in really this robust aspect of interaction with an employee. What does that do for them, their work, and how does it enhance it? What we're seeing smatterings of pilots occur, and we're seeing certainly around 30% of organizations who are truly using this for work. In fact, many of our customers do, where they have particular business lines that are using the virtual assistant for ticket deflection, for upskilling their managers, for knowledge and insights, et cetera. I didn't say search on purpose, but a way for them to be more productive, to allow for them to find the answers that they're looking for. I think a key aspect, though, is that cohesive digital workplace leader being able to measure and sense across systems to understand, well, how is this impacting the employee journey as a whole? How is it impacting their experience? I do think there's a gap there, programmatically, a gap in truly understanding, well, where does this insert and play as a part of our defined strategy?
And Rob, I'm thinking, as I hear you describe that use of AI in that way and how the business needs to think about it, maybe and tying it back to experience and measuring experience, maybe a second way of marrying AI and experience management together is actually, how do I use AI to improve and get better insights into my measurement of experience. So regardless of what I'm measuring, whether it's on my onboarding process, or if I'm measuring the experience of, let's say, a frontline worker in a factory, the experience of somebody in HR, somebody in finance who, they've got that big spike at the end of the quarter where they're going nuts and they're really, putting their PC, through the paces. In any of those cases, traditional experience management is collecting data, it's aggregating it, collating it, And a lot of times it's a human then that is looking at it to trying to
Yeah.
kind of spelunk through the data and create an insight and say, okay, now I see there's a trend here, or there's a pattern, and coming up with a recommendation, because that's, to me, the most important part of experience management, is getting to that insight and finally to an action that's going to now make a change to the employee's experience. That historically, and it's funny I'm saying historically, because experience management, this is a fairly new area in of itself. I'm going to say, in the last 8 years or so, but historically it has all been human driven. It's human smarts looking at the data. So the question I have is, as we go forward, how much will I be able to use AI to analyze this content? Because you're going to have a mixture of employee survey data, which can be either subjective or objective, unstructured, I should say, or structured, and marrying that in with other objective data, looking at it over time, over trends, and using that AI. Can it help me come up with some trend or an insight, and maybe even recommend an action? Because that's where I think you're going to see an acceleration, an exponential growth in the value that I get out of measuring employee experiences, when I can really get a lot of powerful actions that are going to make a change to both experience and productivity, which is what the business cares about.
Yeah, I think you can absolutely get there. I think the struggle for many organizations ultimately will be is their pools of data that they have, are they clean? Are they ready to be tapped into to create that data modeling and to perform that analysis to gain those insights as a part of the total experience? So do we have the number of data pools we need to truly be able to even chat to and provide those reports back to the individuals that need to know? Perhaps that's part of the AI Center of Excellence or the steering committee or whatnot, but to be able to pull that through and understand that, hey, we have some control groups. We have those who are populations that are using, let's say, their virtual assistant or other AI services. Are we seeing productivity gains? Are we seeing an uplift in ENPS? Are we seeing productivity drivers move? Are more sales happening for the sales reps who are actually using, let's say, a virtual assistant or sales agent to help move their deal cycles along and provide them with insights? I think we're on the cusp of that. Absolutely. A lot, once you get to that operational stage, that transformational stage, ends up being on the organization to have the data in place. Have they cleaned that up? I think from there, that's an organization that has a strong governance committee, a strong program strategy, flights of use cases that they've vetted that they're going to transform. Like, they've put wood behind the arrow to make this real, and they're the ones who are going to be able to tap into the necessary information to ideally get those new insights. Because to your point, it's just going to be some poor schmo who's going through, having to go through the data, try to gain insights from it and interpret it, right? You're effectively reading tea leaves.
That's, I think, where there's a big opportunity for AI to help with that.
Absolutely. What about communities of interest, communities of practice emerging around AI topics? Do you see that as a potential move to begin to drive adoption, awareness, and potentially increase AI dexterity within the organization?
Well, I think I'm going to say, traditional organizational change management techniques, or the techniques we've been using for any
Hmm.
change, any new technology that's come in, and how do we use it, those techniques don't go away. They're still needed. I feel like what I tell my solution managers is, when you're building out a new offering, especially in the workplace, digital workplace, I ask them, is this transformational? Is it requiring a change in the way that our clients' employees are going to do their job, and the way they're going to work? In other words, another way of asking the question is, you're claiming an ROI because of this new technology. Is the ROI dependent upon the end user's participation in the process in a collaborative, cooperative way? If the answer to that is yes, then you absolutely have to bake in some sort of organizational change management process and techniques. And it really comes down to 5 questions. Usually it's, what's changing? Why is this changing? And the why can have two parts. There's almost always a business reason, and that could be to save money. So if so, let's be honest about that, right? We're going to expect you to be more productive. There may also be a why that's beneficial to the employee. This is going to eliminate that painful task you have to do at the end of every quarter that takes you, 48 hours of almost nonstop work. Yay, that's a good thing. So what's changing? Why is it changing? Then you need to explain, okay, now I need to have the knowledge of how do I implement this? What do I have to do to take advantage of this technology? And then the last question is, if this doesn't work, because man, we've all seen the great transformational thing, whatever it is in the past, moving to the cloud, client server model, email, whatever.
Sure.
The big promise, it's going to change our lives and make us more productive. And then it doesn't, or it fails, or it doesn't work. Do you have my back? So that's the last question that has to be answered is, if this doesn't work, how do I get help? If you pull the plug on it, will we be able to go back to the old thing? Are you going to leave me hanging here? If we can answer those 4 questions to anybody, then that will really make a big difference in the adoption. And I think it definitely applies to the use of AI as well. And so, for example, even in our rollout of Microsoft Copilot, we had 3 different tracks of users. One group was you're not getting it, as almost like a comparison, right? In time. The second one is you're going to get it, but we're not going to tell you anything about it. It's just hopefully you use it at home, or you're going to research and figure it out. You're going to spelunk on your own. And the third group was you're going to get it, but we're going to really set the expectation. We're going to use these OCM techniques. We're going to give you quizzes. We will have gamification where we reward you for taking the more advanced quizzes. We're going to monitor the usage of it, and we see if what areas of AI that you're using, what you're not using. If we see that you're not using something, we'll ping you, say, "Hey, did you know? Here's a cool feature that you can use at the end of your meetings," or "Here's how you can improve your email." Just tips like that, and set up a community and engage where these people that are participating in this can come in and compare notes. And then the last thing that we did is we set up a prompt library where people could post, here's what I'm using to save time at my meeting, or here's something that I did to create a proposal, or whatever it is. Here's the steps that I use, here's the prompt that I use, and they post the success. They also can post problems. I tried this, and for whatever reason, it doesn't seem to be working. Does anybody have any ideas as to what I did wrong here? And we are seeing a big difference. So the second group that didn't get any training, there's been a certain percentage of individuals that have said, "I'm not getting any value of this. Take my license back. This is if this is going to save, this is $30 a month or whatever it is. Take it back. It's not helping me." Whereas we are seeing a lot more adoption and getting value out of it, and being able to document that value in that third group, which, I guess, going back to your question, how do we, make sure that adoption takes place? It's going back to these original tested and tried OCM techniques that we've used for other transformations.
People haven't changed.
There's still the people side. Yeah, you got to take that into account.
A question for you on that pilot with the 3 different user groups to truly test out and validate, hey, is this worth it? And does OCM end up uplifting the population that is going through formal communities of interest, communities of practice, gamification, good communication, training, support, etc.? Did you cut across the entire organization for that? Was it specific populations? Was it self-selection people could opt into, opt out of?
Yeah, it was definitely a cross section, and it was a committee that went together that came together to make that decision as to really how can we make sure we get as broad a cross section in different roles. We don't track the demographics and age and gender and that sort of thing, but it kind of follows certain roles in the organization. If a certain level 1 service desk is generally going to be a younger person than a director or a senior director, so you kind of get a little bit of that in there. So that was one of the things done. The other thing, going back to the question on ROI, we recognized there is going to be a real need to answer the question, is this saving money?
Yeah.
Because Microsoft has published, what is it, 14 minutes a week, I think it is, you get back, or a day, I forget which one. But regardless, if that's really going to be a savings to a company, the leadership is going to say, okay, that 14 minutes, boom, 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 do the math on number of employees. Can I reduce my headcount by that amount? They're actually going to ask that question. Or they're going to say, is that improving, whatever widgets we're producing? Can I produce that percentage of widgets more? Because at the end of the day, that's your real ROI. Anything else is kind of, it's a lot fuzzier and harder. So what we did is we included a survey that was published every week to say, did you use it? What did you find useful? What did you find problems with? How much time did it save you? It's an estimate, it's self-assessment. And then we asked, what did you do with that time? And it was acknowledged that in some cases, was like, man, I'm overworked. I had a coffee. I skimmed through Facebook. I caught up on things. I took a walk outside, and we're seeing that. Is some of the answers. The others, where it's being applied back to work, is especially in the management level, is I actually had more time to do one-on-ones with people. I've increased my human connection because I was able to offload some of this grunge work that AI was able to help me with. And we are seeing that there is about 40-50% of time that is given back to the human for them to just decompress, because in some cases maybe they were maxing out their day already.
Yeah, that's a very similar pattern that we certainly have seen and measured as a part of Workgrid. When the company originally came about, it came about via Liberty Mutual, coming from end user computing to essentially reduce digital friction as a whole across that manager population. And that was one of the key findings, was, can we take a lot of the noise that ends up being administrative time, transactions for expenses and time off and Ariba requests and et cetera, and move that off the desk to open up time for the manager. And that was a very similar finding, is that, more one-to-ones, more downtime because there was no downtime, or just heads down, right? I have time to focus on the things that, quite frankly, I've been hurrying through and having to move through faster, which creates all sorts of, tension within the individual. I think that gets missed, though, in terms of the ROI question, because to your point, it always comes down to green dollars or brown dollars. Like, is this going to be saving us some money? And oftentimes it's viewed through that lens: revenue, operational expenses. Because I think many times those who procure technology see the stars and banners, millions of dollars saved. Well, is it really? Where does it actually come home to the organization? And I think we're seeing a bit of that with AI in general right now as a general technology to be used. I think there's a lot of ideas of how it can be used. But real tangible use cases, that's one of the things that we've noticed when we've gone out to events. We've done the road shows, the webinars, whatnot. We bring real world examples oftentimes to those presentations, and that definitely gets the most likes, highest rated, seats, standing room only oftentimes, when we go to specific events, because they actually want to see, well, how's this actually being used within a customer domain? They don't want to simply see slides or whatnot. And that hits home. I think for certainly digital workplace leaders, they want to see, what could this do for my business? Are you seeing this very similar pattern as well? Like, hey, where's the realness here?
Yeah, Robin, I think I'm going to say harder for information workers, or folks like us, as opposed to frontline workers. I think there's a much bigger opportunity with frontline workers, and I'll give an example in just a second.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is true about information workers. What is it we produce? Rob, did you produce one more podcast a year because of AI? That could be a measure, right? But it is a kind of a hard thing to do. Measuring the productivity improvement, especially if what a person is delivering in a management level, or we're seeing or directing individuals, you're not producing things, they're easily measurable from the beginning. So now, did I improve that through the use of AI, is also going to be hard. An example where it gets a little easier, for example, in the quick serve restaurant business, there are some very important metrics of the operation of a restaurant and a franchise, such as the drive-through time. How long does it take from a patron coming in, placing the order to the point that order is fulfilled? And it's measured in, less than, it's not minutes, in seconds, right? It's some number of seconds, and every QSR organization has their own metrics there of what they will recognize, and they can tie that time, if it goes from 70 seconds to 120, to lost revenue, especially during certain time periods. One restaurant might be near a football stadium or a concert venue, and it's in a part of town that's pretty quiet most of the time, not a lot of traffic, but there is some massive peak time, and everything in that restaurant has to be working. And there may be 60 plus IoT devices, smart devices in that restaurant, from the kiosks to sensors, temperature sensors, the headset, just the point of sale devices. All of those need to be working properly if they're going to maintain that, whatever their measurement is, 70 seconds, 80 seconds, 90, whatever they want to have through the drive-through. And they have a similar measure for those patrons walking in and pressing on the kiosk or using their phone to order things. So if that is very measurable, then we can back up and say, now I'm going to apply any new transformation. Let's say it's experience management, or the experience of the devices in that facility, or the use of AI to monitor what's going on and raise alerts, or even predict that a certain failure is about to happen, and then maybe proactively resolve it. You can very well connect the dots there between that and lost time, through the drive-through, and then revenue. So I think that's the mindset we need to have as we think about rolling out AI. How do I measure my business today? And then why am I even deploying this technology? Can I connect the dots? If I can't connect the dots between it and that business, then why are you deploying it to begin with?
That's a good point. That's a very good point. And I think you do find that in some organizations, depending on what their strategy is, they stay at that level of just simply piloting, where we're going to test out some things, and they're almost trying to find the use cases that are going to unlock whatever, that budget, that business case that they have, as opposed to leading really from the top with a true program strategy that says, look, here's how we can transform the processes that we have under our umbrella. To your point, if operational efficiency within ensuring that everything runs smoothly within that one store, that one franchise, is operating efficiently, well, how can we begin to introduce services that begin to sense those endpoints and potentially perform analysis on them to then report back where there are gaps, where there are lags, and maybe even recommend improvements of how that time can be brought down.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head on that one. And even going back to the nail, the analogy of if you're a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. That approach is probably not the right one. I'm AI. How am I going to? What's the use case, as opposed to starting with business and working backwards?
Yeah, understanding what inherently do we do as an organization, and how can we make things better? The continuous improvement mindset. What are some of the patterns that you're seeing, or considerations that clients are pushing the pause button on? What are their concerns for AI? Those who haven't necessarily even moved into the pilot stage. What are some of the emerging trends you see?
There's certainly a cost, and there is definitely a question about ROI. That's probably the big one, I think. I see you nodding your head and going, you're seeing that as well. There's I think I can answer the question differently from the business perspective and the employee perspective. So the employee, we kind of alluded to it earlier. There's the fear and uncertainty and doubt. What is expected of me when this lands? How am I going to learn how to use it? Is there an expectation when my colleague is getting great results from it and I'm still bumbling around with, it's not helping me at all? Is that a reflection of me? Is that going to affect my rating, and that sort of thing? So, those are two. Another one is there is a question about security and accuracy, the whole notion of hallucinations, especially with generative AI, but the security side of things. And that leads to, I don't know if you're going to ask me a separate question with regard to recommendations, but that does lead to the need for some foundational things. And one of them that we tell people is, what does your data look like?
Yeah.
You need to have a rigid robust is probably a better word, process in place for handling your data. I mean, as an example, if I was to search in Unisys SharePoint library for information on recommendations for hybrid work, as an example, or working from home, there's no doubt a SharePoint out there that's probably got an article from 2004 that talks about that in some guidelines that's just out there still. You never hit the delete button on it. If the AI, the assistant, the generative AI assistant, Copilot or whatever, finds that article and uses it to tell me what, giving me recommendations, that's probably not a good thing. Really, it should be looking at the most recent one. So that's one of the things we see often is people are focusing on access rights, and Microsoft will say, we respect the access rights that you have put into place. But if you haven't put in access rights properly, like what documents am I allowed to see? Am I able to see everybody's HR records? Am I able to see, everybody's payroll? Different roles in the organization should see different things. Should a contractor, when they come in and we give them access, what should they see? So that access rights, I think that's the first place people look. What is the content? Am I, from by role based? But the one they often missed, I think, is the temporal nature. So if my role may be allow me to look at this document from 2004, but should we let the AI see that, or should the AI be able to tell this is old data, don't use it, only use the most recent one? Because that's going to have a big impact on the accuracy of information. So that is one thing we definitely recommend. Before you get started with this, think about your personas. Do you have an idea who they are and what they need, what they do? Secondly, have you looked at your data? Have you classified it in terms of access rights by role and content, as well as the temporal nature, before you start throwing AI at it to start, giving you garbage answers?
Yeah, and that's what will occur, right? If you go through and start just simply procuring AI washed services or bolting in those services that truly are just simply, more than anything, they're marketing, and we're going to toss an LLM on top of it, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a greater experience, to your point. And that data might be quite solid. And oftentimes organizations haven't done the hard work to identify what is the structured data, what is the official data documentation that we should be emphasizing, particularly if it's related to questions and answers, tickets, our product, sales, etc. And then what is all the weight that we have that's potentially within a lot of those data pools? I think it's one of the reasons why you see enterprise search has oftentimes failed, is because there is so much of a human component in terms of operationalizing that data, cleaning up that data so that it is a good experience. And the organizations that you do see who end up bolting in those services, they've done that hard work, as opposed to, hey, we just threw, this particular vendor on top of SharePoint and a couple other repositories, federated search, and well, why do we get garbage in? Well, garbage in, garbage out, right? It's one of the things that we end up recommending to our customers as they go forward and they start to dip their toes into this. If they're looking for insights and knowledge, really understanding where are we going to start within the organization? Because if we start to boil the ocean and you haven't done that great data collection, no vendor under the sun is going to be able to produce quality results from that. So is there a part of the organization that we can start? Is there particular pools of data that we can begin with, particularly around questions and answers, ticket deflection, or perhaps it's even processes? And quite honestly, there's quite a bit that you can begin to formalize and align to that knowledge and insight story. You bring up age, content, and recency. There's things that we're looking at in terms of social network as well. So the connections that you have within your organization are also touching certain artifacts and assets within an org. So if you're connected to Bob and Jane and they're accessing particular documents, you all have a very similar persona geographically, et cetera. Well, maybe that should have a higher weight and confidence, as opposed to this document that lives in some, closed off repository, hasn't been touched in 10, 20 years. There's ways to get about that. I think that oftentimes get into the knowledge that lives inside the organization that doesn't necessarily get seen as top of mind. Both on the customer side, what they need to do, and on the vendor side, what they have to do.
You hit on something there, Rob, I really hadn't thought of, but I like it. It's this, if I maybe express a different words, is there's a
Sure.
difference in the data classification. There's a static process, one time, not totally one time, but an upfront piece of work that's done in classifying temporal nature and access rights and security level uh,
Hmm.
and confidence. But what you just hit on there was by looking at real time, what is going on in the organization, who is accessing what, and the trends that is producing to give you a confidence level that this particular document might be relevant because you're three of your peers or you're looking at that same document and maybe even nudging you to say, hey, Sally, Jim, and
Yep.
Jerry are all looking at this document. Why aren't you? Maybe not quite that bluntly, but that type of thinking. That's where AI could play maybe a different role than it does yet today.
Yeah, we looked at that as well as smart nudges, particularly around content and conversation. If it's occurring within other applications within the organization, let's say there's hot topics happening that are related to your role. Are there a way you can kind of gently nudge that user to say, "Hey, this might be something you wish to jump into," particularly for an organization that is quite virtual. There's a lot of sense making that can occur, particularly with AI services and conversational AI that assistant can be truly that ultimate Jarvis, if you will, if I use the Marvel Iron Man analogy, that it's guiding you, it's guiding your attention, but it's not necessarily a nuisance to your attention. And that's one of the fine lines we help to guide our customers on is that, look, you want to give those notifications, you want to allow for that conversation to happen, but you don't want to just overwhelm. This shouldn't be another inbox for you to just simply toss inane content in front of them. Um, it's not another channel, if you will, to Cupcake Tuesdays or whatnot. It should be for things that are value add to that individual. And that's why understanding your personas is so key to where, from our perspective, where conversational AI can begin to create value based on your populations. Security, you brought that up. That certainly is top of mind concern. One of the things that we're certainly seeing, I'm not sure if it's something that you hear as well, is that a number of customers don't want to train a model. They do not want their company's utterances, even if they've been redacted, even if the data has been cleansed, passed over to a public LLM, which is ultimately going to be tuned to train, or even a vendor LLM that is training on customer utterances. But you see that pattern happening as well. Is that something that you've come across?
Yeah, it's actually moved us to realize that if we're really going to have a rich AI ecosystem, more
Mm.
than just a chatbot that answers questions, but can ultimately be taking actions on the
Mm.
back end, that there's a real concern about security. Where is this? Where's the data that's going back and forth? And so this notion of an in-tenant model has really come to the fore for us, and that's what we're doing. Is every implementation, clients have their own tenant
Hmm.
of Azure, let's say, or their cloud platform of choice. That's where, if we're bringing something in, let's put it all in there in that same tenant, so that the information isn't leaving. You just imagine, going back to the restaurant example, how comfortable a restaurant would be allowing us, a vendor, to come in through, the internet and bring data back, and then and push things in. Even there, edge based
Hmm.
AI. That's another important model that is, there's a performance component, but there's also a security component as well.
Absolutely. And that's the pattern that we end up focusing on is really a bring your own LLM approach for an organization to really bring the services that they have vetted, that's gone through their security, or potentially even mix and match based upon their use case. So they may be using Anthropic for X use cases, they're using OpenAI for Azure for others. Perhaps they want to use Amda or even Minstrel. There's opportunities there to align whatever their services are into specific use cases. And I think that's going to be an emergent trend over time, is that ability to really pare down, customize as AI dexterity increases, as these resources start to up level within organizations, and it's not just simply an add-on service. I think there's plenty of potential for that. What about the future? What do you think's over at least? Look, this is in terms of open AI kicking open the door of I think AI being a general technology in the mind share. What's it been? 18 months, a little bit over that. What do you see the next year being in terms of emergent trends? What are things top of mind with your clients?
Well, there's still a lot of people trying to figure out everyday AI, right? The ones you get not for free, but they show up automatically, semi-automatically in your apps, your productivity apps, and so on. That's going to continue. And as they continue to add, I'm talking about, like Microsoft adding more features and capability and refining what it can do. That's going to continue, no question. It would be unusual at some point in the future for anybody to do their job and not have some sort of uh, intelligent agent helping them, prompting them, looking what they're doing, suggesting, right? It's the consumer world, it would be in the business world as well. But it's going beyond that everyday AI to the transformational AI. That's where I think the leaders are moving toward. And we definitely see that, with Workgrid, what you guys have put together. But this need of having, I'll say, a custom co-pilot where I want to take advantage of an LLM, so it's either BYO AI, bring your own AI, bring your own LLM, or you bought into an ecosystem there of using a certain LLM. But now I've got my business specific processes. I want to take advantage of that conversational AI interface, all the effort that's gone into creating that, but it doesn't know what I do as in a bank or a hospital or an airline or even in any industry, a process like submitting a purchase order or my travel approval, or how do I do that? Training a new employee on these things, making it possible for them, instead of going tapping on someone's shoulder, even knowing who to ask, you talk to your bot, that it's a custom co-pilot specific to a business process. That is something that you're going to see leaders in this space, I think, doing more and more, doing more effectively, taking the business specific knowledge, that domain, and without, publishing it externally, integrating it, tokenizing it, and integrating it not into, but with an LLM, so that together it's able to help resolve problems that are business or process specific. I think that's what we're going to see.
No, I think you're right. I think you're right. And certainly those organizations that are leading from the front, they're thinking about that already. They've gone through their pilots. They've been able to validate their approach. They formulated their centers of excellence or their governance committee, and they're making those steps. I do think this will help to reshape work. I think about a year ago, you heard, "Oh, AI is coming for your job." I don't think it's necessarily coming from your job. Maybe it's coming for your role description, and that might have to change. But I don't think it's necessarily going to start culling out work as a whole. I think it's going to end up generating different types of work, different working models, if you will, and perhaps hopefully even better work, so that you're not necessarily stuck bouncing around between systems or what have you. You're able to focus on, if you're a sales rep, that deal cycle. If you're in HR, maybe getting you out of your inbox and focusing on more of the human connections, etc. Weston, really appreciate your time today. Where can folks learn more about Unisys, yourself, or even your podcast?
Yeah, well, I'm on LinkedIn. My podcast, the Digital Workplace Deep Dive, is syndicated on most podcasting channels. You just search for that title. It's also hosted, of course, on the unisys.com site under Digital Workplace Deep Dive. But I'm available on LinkedIn. I love hearing from other people. You and I met at the ISG Future of Work Conference in New York, and connected, and says, "Hey, let's compare notes because of our similar backgrounds and experience, and we learn from each other." And now here we are sharing with your audience. So I absolutely love doing that.
Fantastic. Thanks again.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.